So I honestly mean this. I think Delicious in Dungeon, with its fourth episode, might be one of the most creative things we've not only seen in this show, but I think it confirms that Delicious in Dungeon might be, in terms of raw creativity, nothing's comparing to it, I think, in this anime season. That's not saying other anime in this season aren't really good. I mean, this might not be my overall favorite show of the season, but I think just the idea of how they just took a golem, a very, maybe not as typical as in anime, but if you play any fantasy video game, read a lot of fantasy books, literature and stuff, golems are a pretty universally used thing. And just the idea of turning it into a mobile garden, not only that protects itself in a dungeon, but how you can then flatten it out, harvest all your crops, put the totem back in, and in a day or two, it'll just once again be a mobile garden ready for defense. It is so interesting how the concept of traveling through a dungeon and having a typical dungeon crawler series, but then adding in that cooking show element, turns something that you think you've seen before. Or maybe you're thinking, I'm not really into watching Gordon Ramsay cook, or I'm not really into watching cooking shows in general. So why the hell would I want to watch a show specifically about dungeon crawling that's entire goal is to make dishes? Well, Delicious in Dungeon says, listen, we're going to show you the most creative way to get ingredients, we're going to show you some badass action as seen by last week in the whole suit of armor, and we're also just going to show some very interesting bickering between a group of characters and some orcs, and it's lucky that orc has a kid, because otherwise I'm pretty sure we would have been turned into stew, because that Papa Orc was not having what we were selling. I have a full live reaction to today's wonderful Delicious in Dungeon episode over on my Patreon, so if you'd like some full and good thoughts over there if you're interested. So episode 4, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it more than last week, but I definitely think 3 and 4 are the best of the series, which is a very good sign for the show going forward. If I was already still saying, man, I wish how episode 1 and 2 were, then, potentially this show isn't going to be as for me as I originally thought. But in fact, I really like seeing how they're able to progress through this dungeon, have a very typical, okay, last week, more here's a idea, a suit of armor that moves by itself but seemingly nothing inside. Let's go very creative with it and show what could actually be inside, and once again how we could cook that into something that was mostly delicious other than the helmet, because, well, that helmet was rank and obviously didn't smell too good when you cook your oysters or whatever else you're cooking in it. Where with this episode, we had a very normal set of ingredients, all things considered, but the way we got it was very unorthodox, and they went about it in such an interesting way. At first, I thought maybe they were using the golems as kind of like a defense, right? Like, you maybe shave some dirt off the golems, now you have a little area that you could plant your carrot seeds, your potato, whatever else you're gonna do. And instead, they made it so much more interesting. The golems are a natural habitat for growing vegetables. They're 99% soil, they're moist, they basically are a walking ecosystem to grow your food. The only thing is, a golem isn't just gonna stand by and have you plant some seeds on it, right? So the idea that our boy Senshi, who I continue to say is the best character in this show, he's the most interesting, he's potentially the most deranged, there is something about him that there's something wrong up in his mind. This boy almost got himself killed over making a loaf of bread, and don't get it mistaken, a freshly made loaf of bread does taste rather good, but I don't know, maybe following your so-called friend back to his lair, who probably will eat you or kill you based on current circumstances, isn't the best way to go about things, but then again, maybe you could make the argument he knows that he would be fine because he knows he's a softie with his kid. I don't think he was thinking that far. I think he was just thinking about the bread, but hey, all's well that ends well, I suppose. Our boy comes in with nothing but a shovel and just pops out the little totem on all 3. Big giant dirt bank here. What does he do? He harvests a bunch of potatoes, some carrots, some cabbage, and it's all fresh. I love the idea that when you're in a system like a dungeon, which you see this in any dungeon crawler show, right? Dungeons are dangerous. There's a lot of monsters. So it's not like you just okay, here's my garden, right? Monsters are going to rip it up. Monsters are going to rip it apart, eat it, whatever else you have. So the idea of having this mobile squad that not only protects everything on its back, it doesn't try to do anything to it, doesn't bother it, it naturally is just going to protect itself. And they're in a pretty safe looking location anyway, so it makes it even better. So the idea of mining everything out of there and then planting a bunch of new seeds and then burying the totems back. And like you said, once the plants start to sprout, what's going to end up happening is they'll be revived. So it's not even like it's an instant thing. So in theory, as long as you're able to get to their little totems very quickly, the perfect idea. And while of course Marcel is a little salty that wait a second, you put feces on the dirt, it's well, that's manure. What do you think? How do you grow things in our own world, right? She has a bit of an overreactive imagination. I think some of the things that freak her out freak me out as well. In this case, I'm just like, girl, you have to understand, like, there's a reason why we wash our fruits and vegetables and anything else, because, well, between the chemicals we use to keep it preserved, and most importantly, even if they're pre-washed, I mean, yeah, a lot of that stuff is soaked in manure-filled dirt. Like, just deal with it. It's not the end of the world. But it was such a cool way to go about it because they make a very normal-looking dish, which was a kind of pleasant change of pace, given, honestly, what they ate last week, and I wouldn't touch that with a 5-foot pole. And then the way they end it up with the whole orc storyline was very natural, because now they have this giant harvest, right? They're not going to be able to eat all that, and it's all fresh, right? Like, they have no way to preserve most of this stuff. So while they could make a ridiculous amounts of stew and stuff, they don't really have a way to store it, so selling it for some money is the next way to go. The scumbags. I don't think they necessarily deserve to be slaughtered the way they were, but they were very salty. Only give us the gold coins. Don't show Cook's ingredients. The Cook's needs gold. It's like just a group of scumbags. I wasn't sure who got stabbed at first. I was a little shooketh because literally last week we've already confirmed our boy's been killed a couple of times at least. And while yes, you can revive, if there's no healer to revive you, it's game over. I saw some people last week say like it removes the idea of threats. If the body's completely destroyed, you can't be revived. If your healer is no longer around, you can't be revived. Potentially, you know, not just any generic healer would be able to do it anyway. So there's a lot of ways that characters could still end up dead. And as a group of orcs come in and slaughter that entire inn, had they been on the receiving end, they also would have ended up dead. No one was going to revive them, right? So the idea that basically we still have to not get stabbed, or at the very least make sure our healer has the potential to drag us away, teleport us away, anything like that. Like Marcel is probably the most useful person in this party out of sheer like, if she goes, we're probably all screwed for good, because who else is gonna heal us or anything like that. So the idea that, you know, Senshi has like this friendship with this orc, but the orc's kind of in bad times. The red dragon's back, which of course we know, and the red dragon has made it so probably they're struggling a lot more than they would, right? So it makes sense, you know, you might have been able to start out with, hey, Senshi, I know we would normally buy your ingredients, but could you just give it to us today? And he probably would have said, yeah, that's fine. I mean, we're not going to be able to use it anyway. How about you let me make some bread? Would have been a very easy way to go about two friends reuniting, but instead it's like, bro, I'm sorry to do this, but give me your shit. And I'm like, well, that escalated quickly. Not saying I don't see where he's coming from, but maybe there was a nicer way to go about it. And then, of course, Senshi being Senshi, just decides to almost get everyone killed because he wants to make a loaf of bread. Thank God the guy had a kid, because that kid, I think, honestly saved our life. And then in return, we get a map of how to find the red dragon, or at least hopefully. And just in general, it was such a well-produced episode. It was funny. It continues on the trend of taking monsters that we're either accustomed to or have seen before, or just at least have heard before, and do it in such a new creative way while simultaneously making it a cooking show all at the same time. As I've been saying since episode 1, I really think this is one of the best shows of the season. It's definitely in a top 3 for me of this anime season. And honestly, there's a few shows fighting for that number 1 spot, but this is a fantastic show, and episodes 3 and 4 I definitely think took Delicious in Dungeon up a notch. Now, of course, those are my feelings. Let me know what you thought down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, of course, ring that bell so you get notified when I upload more. And like I said, we have a full live reaction over on my Patreon. And hey, while you're over there, you also get a video shout out. So today we have X Nico, Michael Barnes, Nugzio, and Fuzzy. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care and have a good one.